In this video, we're going to look at podcasting. I'm Mark Pegram, and I'll be taking you through this material. Here's the usual copyright notice that you see at the start of all the online videos. Now, let's get started. The first question is whether podcasting is an e-learning or an m-learning technology. Podcasts were originally seen as being associated with mobile devices. In fact, the very name podcast comes from the iPod. The idea was that you could download an audio file onto your computer, transfer it to a mobile device, and then listen while on the move. But a lot of research has been done in this area, and what's been established very clearly is that when it comes to educational podcasting, people prefer to listen to these materials when they are stationary, perhaps because it's easier to concentrate. What's more, a lot of people prefer to listen to podcasts on desktop or laptop computers, perhaps because it's easier to look at supplementary handouts, to make notes, or to do associated exercises. So in many ways, podcasting is actually more of an e-learning technology than an m-learning technology. As you may already be aware, Apple discontinued the iPod Classic in 2014, leaving only these variants on the original iPod. However, this does not affect podcasting in any way. Despite the fact that the name comes from the original iPod, podcasts, as we've just been saying, can be listened to on any device, whether mobile or not. Another question is whether a podcast has to be syndicated. In the original meaning, a podcast was one of a series of audio files that you could subscribe to through podcatcher software such as iTunes, and whenever a new episode became available, you would be prompted to download it. However, nowadays, many people use the term podcast to simply mean any digital audio file that's available online. That has very much become the normal usage nowadays. Podcasts can be used in a very Web 1.0 way, where students simply listen to them. Their purpose can be information transmission or to get students involved in behaviourist-style drills and quizzes. When podcasting is used in this way, it typically falls into one of two categories as described by Oliver McGarr. Substitutional podcasting is when a podcast replaces presentation or lecture material. It might be, for example, a pre-recorded lecture by the teacher, or it might be a podcast sourced from elsewhere to replace material that the teacher would normally cover. On the other hand, supplementary podcasting, as the name suggests, consists of additional material, which again might be created by the teacher or might be sourced from elsewhere. Substitutional podcasting in particular, but also supplementary podcasting, can play a very important role in a flipped classroom approach, allowing students to go through presentational material in their own time before coming to class and freeing up class time for more interaction. If, as a teacher, you want to use podcasts with your students, you can of course create your own. But otherwise, you can explore the huge array of podcasts which are already available online. The best way to search for them is to download the free iTunes software. Just as iTunes catalogues a lot of the music available around the world, it also catalogues a lot of the podcasts. Unlike music, podcasts are generally free. You can subscribe to a whole series, or you can download a specific episode within a series. It's very likely that whatever you're teaching, you will find podcasts out there which are relevant to your needs and your students' needs. Don't forget too that many public institutions now produce podcasts. The New York Public Library is just one example amongst hundreds. It's worth remembering that many podcasts come with supplementary materials. This is a series of Mandarin Chinese lessons, for example. Many of the supplementary materials are not in fact audio files. For example, there are PDFs which give translations and vocab and so on. There are even videos which show how to write certain characters. So although podcasting was originally all about audio, nowadays it's very multimodal. And bear in mind that there's also iTunes U, where many universities and other educational institutions and organizations make whole courses available. Teachers can also create customized courses here, and students can even create ebooks. If you want to use podcasts in a more Web 2.0 way, it's important to think about how you can get students to create their own. This, unsurprisingly, is known as creative podcasting, and there is a great deal of educational potential here. To make a podcast, of course you need audio recording equipment, but actually many people have this kind of equipment with them on a daily basis in the form of a smartphone or a tablet. I won't go into great detail about the steps that you need to follow because there are some very good guides online. I'd particularly recommend this one called Podcasting by Wes Fryer. You'll find a link to this guide as well as to other similar guides on the podcasting page of the eLanguage Resources Wiki. But essentially you need to make your recording, you might want to edit it, and then you need to upload it to an online space where other people can access it. And that's it. Students can certainly be taught to do this and can do it themselves quite easily. And if you don't want to go through iTunes directly, you might find that this very well-known service, Podomatic, is a good place to store and share your podcasts. Podcasting obviously has a lot of potential for language learners, but there are many other possible uses as well. For an example of the use of podcasting in the context of history lessons, you might like to visit the iHistory podcast project, where an Australian history teacher asked his students to create podcasts about important figures and events in Australian history. Let's take a quick look at some variations on podcasting. You can find an interesting variation on the basic podcasting idea on the Canadian Murmur site. What you're looking at here is a map of part of Toronto. Wherever there's a dot, you can click and you can open up an interview conducted by a student in that place with someone who lives or works in the area. Even if there's not a map already existing for your own city, you could add one, or you could do a similar kind of exercise with your own map on a wiki or a website, for example. With Vocaroo, you can make audio recordings, and you'll be given a separate URL, that is, a web address, for each recording you make. You can then share the links as you wish. Kaizena is an add-on for Google Docs, which allows you to make audio or even video comments on documents. It's a great way of teachers giving feedback, but also of students giving feedback to each other. So, pulling all of this together, we can say that when podcasting is used in a Web 1.0 way, students can learn fairly passively through listening. This is where substitutional and supplementary podcasting come in. Of course, students can be active to a certain extent if they're asked to engage in quizzes and drills and so on. When podcasting is used in a more Web 2.0 way, students can learn more actively as they produce their own podcasts, and that of course is what we call creative podcasting. On the downside, there is some dependence on equipment, but actually the equipment that you need to make audio recordings is becoming very widespread in the form of smartphones and tablets. For more detail about podcasting and some related educational references, you might like to take a look at the podcasting page of the Digital Learning website. You'll find it at the address at the bottom of the screen.